Thank you very much. Good evening. I'm Gleaves, Whitney. I'm director of the Hauenstein Center for Presidential Studies here at Grand Valley, and I'm just delighted that you joined us this evening. Welcome to a very special presentation titled Shock of War, Trauma of Peace, Why War Haunts So Many of the Veterans Who Experience Combat. Before I do anything else, I'd like to ask who in this room has served in the armed forces for this country. Would you please stand? Would you please stand? Please stand. The applause said it all, but I'm going to say it. Thank you for your service to our country. Shell shock, battle fatigue, combat fatigue. These are some of the old terms used to describe post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. The disorder is apparently as old as human history. Already in 750 BC, we discern signs of it in Homer's gruesome descriptions of battle in the Trojan War. But we see it perhaps more tellingly in Odysseus' long return back home, in which he experienced 10 years of trial and triumph, but all kinds of confusion that vexed him. He didn't understand the experiences that he was going through. At several points, this brave Greek warrior, Odysseus, who had fought so heroically, who seemed to have no fear, was actually afraid of the demons within him in his journey home, and he would utterly break down and weep during that 10-year period. When modern warfare blasted onto the stage of history, especially in the killing fields of World War I, soldiers suddenly found that language was no longer adequate to express the horrors of 20th century warfare. So they went silent. The World War I generation returned home largely silent. The World War II generation returned home largely silent. The Vietnam generation returned home largely silent. For the most part, they kept their grief bottled up inside. But if you listen to the pauses between the words of any combat veteran of World War II or Korea or Vietnam, or the Persian Gulf, of Iraq and Afghanistan, you might learn of a modern-day Odysseus. An Odysseus who is struggling to come back home. Not struggling geographically, of course, but struggling emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. And the idyllic scenes of childhood, the security of family love, seem to belong to a different life. The last few years have seen encouraging progress in our society as increasing numbers of combat veterans have opened up and talked about their war experiences with one another and with their families and increasingly with professionals. They're brave to do so because they're waking demons that lurk just beneath the surface. We are finally beginning to learn more about PTSD and find better ways of helping people who have suffered from it. Well, joining us this evening are three very special people who are competent to discuss PTSD from their respective traditions. I'd like them to come and take their places at the table here. This is like the sound of music. Here they come. Yes, thank you. From your left to right, Dr. Michael Ryan, Carolyn Carino, and Jim Hodges. Now, Michael's going to be easy to remember because he's the one that my staff thinks looks like Freud. I'd first like to introduce my good and loyal friend, Dr. Michael Ryan, to whom goes the credit for initially thinking up this. Michael and I go out, we have lots of lunches together. We're always throwing around ideas with each other to test out what might be a good idea to pursue. And because I have a son who went into the Iraq War, I have a special interest in, the PTSD conference. And he's worked very closely with Carolyn Carino to his left in developing this conference, as a matter of fact. Well, in addition to being a very loyal personal friend of over 3 decades, Michael has been a distinguished psychologist for more than a quarter of a century. He earned his PhD at Colorado State University, and he has since built up a full-time practice in West Michigan. His work has been devoted to treating children and adults with learning disabilities, to publishing in professional journals, to teaching college-level courses, where he's a very popular teacher, I understand. I'd love to take one of his courses. And to serving on a number of boards involved with worthy public causes. And I don't mean to embarrass Mike, but he's got a great family, a lovely wife, very courageous wife, and 2 daughters, one of whom is here. Bridget, where are you? One of the daughters is here. There's Bridget, one of his daughters, right there in the middle. So we're glad you're here too, Bridget. Well, with that, I would like to invite Dr. Michael Ryan to come forward, and he now will introduce Carolyn Carino.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Good. I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. Evenings during the summer are very special, and I appreciate you being willing to come in. I also want to thank the Hauenstein Center. Their willingness to help sponsor this has just been tremendous. And Gleaves and his staff, Brian and Mandy and Kathy, have just done a super job in helping us and really making tonight possible. Next, I'd like to make a request of you. And it's a simple one, but I would request of you that you leave your politics at the door. I know war, particularly now, is very controversial. People have strong feelings, both for and against. But I'd like tonight to be a night for the soldiers, for the men and women who put their lives on the line for us. And if we get embroiled in political discussions, it takes away from them and perhaps our capacity to help them. Next, I have the pleasure of introducing Carolyn Carino, who I've known for many years. She's a very competent and ethical therapist who works hard with her patients. I've always admired her as a psychotherapist, but over the last year, I've had the chance to work with her on this presentation, and I have been so touched by the relationship she's developed with the men from her father's old brigade of Marines who served in the South Pacific during the Second World War. My image of it is that they've almost adopted each other, and Carolyn has become just a critical person in their lives. In fact, she was the chairperson of their reunion just about a month ago. Was it May? Mm-hmm. In Washington, D.C., the 25th reunion. And she loves these men, and I think she's been able to communicate this with her empathy and love in a way that's allowed these men to open up. And so that all of a sudden they started talking about their experiences, what it was like for them when they came back from the war. And sure enough, many of these men have suffered the symptoms we're going to talk about. They still, into their 80s and 90s, suffer from post-traumatic stress syndrome. And for me, hearing this, I'm crushed, because I remember growing up, and these men were my heroes. They fought under terrible conditions in the bloodiest of battles. They had tremendous heroism, and then they came home and built a nation that I was lucky enough to grow up in and be able to prosper and enjoy my freedom. And just incredible, the greatest generation. And yet there's a group of men, brave men, who nightly would be terrorized, believing the Japanese were about to attack. And they couldn't talk to anyone. They lived for 40 and 50 years alone with these feelings. And as I think about our men and women coming home from Iraq and Afghanistan, this cannot happen again. As a mental health professional, as a community, I think we really need to give these men and women the help they need. So I'm very excited to introduce Carolyn. Her insights and the relationships she developed are just incredible. Thank you.